and welcome to the Agile Education Marketing webinar series. Today's webinar is on identifying and courting your highest value prospects. I'm Alyssa Tomasetti, your moderator today, and I am joined by Liz Acton and Terry Payson from Agile Education Marketing. We have a really great webinar planned for you today. On our agenda, first, Liz will begin with an EdTech success story because she is not only the Director of Marketing for Agile Education, but she's also a previous client. Then Terry Payson will talk about EProfile and she'll demo it for you. Then Liz will return and talk about the education buying cycle. We will delve into data-informed campaign strategies and talk further about channels, content, and creative. We will, of course, close with some Q&A from everybody on today's webinar. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Liz Acton, the Director of Marketing for Agile Education Marketing.
Thank you, Alyssa, and good morning, everyone. And yes, so I, previously to coming over to Agile Education Marketing, was a client at a smaller ed tech company. And I joined that company several years ago with the intent of creating a more formal marketing organization that really focused on impacting the business. The company was very sales driven and it had had a lot of success, and it was looking to become a little bit more sophisticated and to grow, of course, as most companies want to do. And the way forward for them was to really transform marketing from a promotional type and Marcom type of department into an actual business driver, moving into demand gen and lead generation. With the database marketing background that I have, was really the place for me to start, was to look at the data, look at the systems that we had in place, and try to figure out how to start doing things that could help me better segment our customers, that could allow me to do some lookalike targeting and refine our strategies, and also look at our content. So what I did when I first started was, I looked at our internal data, and what you probably know is that when you start with internal data, you can see some similarities amongst some of your best and most profitable customers. But what you can't see are the things that aren't part of your customer records, nor how these things stack up to the overall universe, uncovering some of the key differences about accounts and the people who actually choose to use your product or service. So this is a really great way to start exploring and looking at some third-party data sources. So let's take a little bit of a step back and talk about the situation that I came into. So I told you that it was very much a sales-driven organization, and marketing had been, some emails that would go out occasionally. One of the first things I found about some of the email marketing was that it was not only not terribly successful, it had nearly zero success. Nobody opened our emails, which meant no one clicked on them, and they certainly weren't driving any, interested people and capturing any leads with these emails. So I started looking at the performance by title, by school type, and some other data points, and I really, even then could not find any pockets of success. So some of the things that, were just happening at that particular moment with this company was that we didn't have a full data lease for third-party data. So I wasn't able to even do some experimentation with additional titles or look at, different types of demographics. It was a very small subset of the overall universe of K-12 education. Also, the data that I had wasn't integrated into the CRM, and there really wasn't a marketing automation platform. So I had really basic tools to work with. And I really didn't have the ability to see where my current accounts were plentiful versus the general universe of schools or districts. And that's where you can really start to do some cohort or lookalike targeting that can really help you be successful. So what I did was I moved forward with a data analysis. So brought on board Agile Education Marketing, talked to my account management team about the situation and what I wanted to do, and they recommended doing an analysis that's called EProfile. And I'm sure that a lot of data providers can do an analysis like this for you. And Terry is going to follow up the case study that we're going to take a look at right now with a real deep dive into the tool, the reporting, and I think most importantly, the interpretation of the data and how to make meaning of it and make it actionable. So once I did the EProfile, I had a better understanding of the types of schools and districts that made up not only the bulk of my customer base, but also the most valuable customers, so that I could begin to refine my lead generation and even my lifecycle marketing campaigns. So you can go out to non-customers who look like your customers, but you also have insight into what types of customers over time have been your most profitable and valuable, which can help you with expansion programs into your existing client base. And you can even look at the data against product profile and understand what types of customers purchase from your different portfolio offerings. So one of the first things that we found once we did this EProfile is that the results were not what anyone expected. And once you see the tool, you'll have an understanding of how it can help have conversations with leadership and with sales leadership especially, to dig in and have some objective input into where the best prospecting areas are. So at that point, I was able to look at everything that the EProfile came back with. So what we walked into was this mandate that marketing needed to focus on urban schools and districts and large enrollment size. And what we uncovered was that our best and most profitable customers were actually in mid-sized to small districts, not very small and not very big, right in the middle. And also the best market types, or the, is it urban or is it rural, what type of actual market these schools and districts were in was actually town and rural, not remote, not urban, which was completely different from the thinking that had been in place prior to us performing this EProfile analysis. So that explained, one, why we weren't getting any responses to our marketing, because we were going after the wrong people. So it also, though, helped to very easily pivot all of the marketing, because we had some objective data, we had hard data, and now we could move forward with not only refining targeting and the marketing, but sales planning and rep productivity. So from a marketing stance, obviously just suddenly you can go after these lookalikes. You know exactly who it is, who look just like your best customers, and you market to them. From a sales planning perspective, you can look and see where are the geographies or territories that have a lot of these ideal customer profiles, and where are the areas that don't. And now you can really understand what's the opportunity and set up your territories and your sales objectives appropriately. From a rep productivity perspective, we had, sales can sometimes be a pretty high turnover department, and you've got a lot of new reps who are struggling to figure out how best to use their time. Well, now I could inform them that within their territory, here are some really hot prospects based on our profiling, and it really helped them have some success and have some really good success at the very start of their foray into a particular new market. From a content perspective, now we can dig into the challenges that are really unique to these types of schools and districts, uncover some common priorities or programs, design content that's relevant to these groups, and really revamp all of the value propositions to fit these targets. So in my case, at this ed tech company, what I found was that because these districts were smaller, they had a much less complex buying process. The superintendent probably wasn't the best person to go after. Really, you're looking at principals and a lot of times lead teachers. That really helped to, again, target by title who we needed to be connecting with and who sales needed to be talking to. Another thing that we found is that many people wore many hats. So one of the things that this ed tech curriculum offered was the full scope of subjects, remediation, as well as more of the accelerated learning, and it allowed for self-paced learning. So what that meant is one teacher could learn one platform and either address many students studying many different subjects in a particular class hour, while also being able to teach multiple subjects from that same platform. So understanding how it was being used and why it fit helped me to adjust my messaging. So some of the points that I think are really important to make about doing this EProfile was that I didn't have a marketing automation platform. I was working with very basic tools. I had to really just leverage marketing know-how to get the program started. And I used these small successes that I had with, doubling webinar registrations, for example, increasing my campaign response. It did actually happen from 0 to about average, getting some 5 to 10% open rates and 2 to 4% click-through rates. And increasing lead capture from the content that we were creating on the website, blog posts, rewriting a lot of the product descriptions and value props. We went from just bringing in, maybe 5, sometimes on a great month, 10 leads from our website into, some months we get up to 50. So we had some definite quantifiable successes based on some of this work. And what I did was I used the small successes to project the impact of a full-scale program. And so from that, I was able to actually, by the time I left, have a full-scale marketing automation platform in place, as well as it integrated with a CRM platform that had been fully customized to support the sales team, and those two systems supporting a lot of direct marketing activity and data-informed practices. So I would love to hand it over to Terry now so that she can actually take us all through what an EProfile looks like, how to read the data, and most importantly, how to make meaning from that data. So Terry, if I could hand it over to you.
Great, thanks Liz, and thank you Alyssa. So as Liz mentioned, an EProfile is a great way to get a better understanding of the characteristics of your customer base. And with this tool, you can learn enough to make decisions about future marketing efforts, finding which segments of the market are responding well to your current sales strategy and which might need some changes to drive stronger performance. So if we could move to the next slide, I want to give a really brief overview of the process that we use to create the EProfile. So first, you need to define the group that you want to profile. Maybe it's going to be lifetime customers and their total sales. Maybe it's going to be more specific, like last year's sales of a specific product line. Whatever the definition is of the group you want to profile, you would send us a file of customers in that defined group with revenue data for that defined time period and definition. Then we'll take that customer file, match it to our database. If you send us more than one record at a single institution, let's say you maybe have 2 teachers in the same school that bought products, we'll match both of those to the same institution and roll up the revenue to that one institution. And then we'll remove all the inactives. And from there we create the EProfile of the matched and unduplicated active customers. We make that profile available to you online. You'll meet with your Agile account team to review the results, but then you'll have access to the data and it's downloadable for you to share with your team anytime you need it. So just briefly in the example given here on this slide, this sample profile, the client supplied us with almost 31,000 records. When we matched that to our database, we matched almost 21,000 of them. And then after we netted out the duplicates and the inactives, we came up with 20,659 unique active institutions. And that's what we use to create the profile that you're going to look at. Excuse me. Just real briefly, I do want to mention that the client for which this EProfile was made, this sample profile, they didn't want to profile elementary schools. They were looking only at products for middle school and high school grades. So in the sample report that we're going to look at, we did not include elementary schools. Let's go to the next slide. These are sample reports from an existing profile, so you can see how your profile might look. So here's their report on public school enrollment. In the first column, we can see the number of students in each building. In the second column, we see the number of customer schools in each of those enrollment categories. And in the next column, the number of Agile schools in each enrollment category. The Agile column here represents the universe of schools in each of these enrollment categories. In the next set of columns, we see the percentage of customer schools in each category, and then the percentage of Agile schools in each category. So if this client were a perfectly average client, and their customer distribution was perfectly average and random, every school was equally likely to buy, then we would expect to see the percentages in those two columns to match. If 12% of the schools in the country have fewer than 100 students, then we'd expect 12% of the customer base to have fewer than 100 students. But of course, we know that not every school is equally likely to buy. That's the whole point of doing the profile. So we use the index figure in the next column to compare these two percentages. The closer that index number is to 1, the closer that enrollment category is to that perfectly average distribution that I was talking about. If the index is lower than 1, then that enrollment category is disproportionately underrepresented on the customer file. And if the index is higher than 1, then that enrollment category is disproportionately overrepresented. So the higher the index, the higher the likelihood of converting a customer in that enrollment category. And you can see in that column that some of the numbers are red, some of the numbers are green, and some are black. Those numbers that are red are more than 25% below average, and those that are green are more than 25% above average. And you can see in this example that as enrollment increases, so does the index. And this, again, is a pretty typical finding because schools with more students do tend to buy more products and services. They have more dollars and a greater diversity of needs because they have a larger population, so they're more likely to buy. Now let's look over a little bit further to the right. And in this example, you can see in the bottom row of the table that about $73 million in revenue comes from public schools, and that works out to about $5,400 per school. And in each row, you can see the total revenue attributed to each enrollment category and the revenue per school in each enrollment category. We compared the overall revenue per school for public schools, which again is $5,400, to the revenue per school in each enrollment category to create the revenue index. And again, you can use this index to see how far below average or above average each category performs in terms of revenue. The revenue index also increases as enrollment increases. And I want to point out a couple of things. In the two enrollment categories of 100 to 299 students and 300 to 499 students, their likelihood of conversion as represented by the index column is approximately average. There's one at 1.03 and one at 0.97, so very close to 1. And in the largest schools, I'm sorry, let me step back for a second there. Those two indexes were very close to 1, but if you look at the revenue index, they're quite far below average. So those schools that have about average performance in terms of conversion actually produce far lower revenue than average per school. And you can see that the largest schools with 1,500 students or more generate about twice the average revenue per school as shown in their revenue index. The pattern of revenue index rising as enrollment rises is also typical. It stands to reason that a larger school would buy more than a smaller school because they need more. They need more of everything. They have more students, they need more books, more desks, more pencils, so on and so forth. So we then created a score combining the two indexes to give you a weighted index, which ranks performance by both their likelihood to buy and the amount of revenue they generate. And in this way, you can rank enrollment categories by their overall importance as far as likelihood of purchase and size of purchase. And I last want to call your attention to the column labeled coverage of segment. This gives you an idea of how much room you have left to grow in each area. So in the segment of large schools with 1,500 students or more, performance has been very good. They are twice as likely to buy as the average school, and they generate twice the revenue of the average school. So we really like this segment. It performs really well for us. But 2/3 of them are already customers. So while there is some room for growth in this category, it is approaching saturation. We've already done a really great job of converting customers in this category. So we'll want to look at some other enrollment categories for more growth. And that's how you read a report in EProfile. Again, school enrollment almost always shows a pattern like we've seen here, performance increasing as enrollment increases. But when we look at other data variables, there's not necessarily a standard pattern. So if we look at the next slide, we'll see an example of that. This is metro status. And over on the left, the census categories are listed in that first column. They go from most urban at the top to the most rural at the bottom of the list. And in this case, you can see that that performance index does increase very incrementally as you move from the largest cities away toward the suburbs, until we get very strong performance when it comes to converting those schools in the most rural areas. They're almost 1.5 times as likely to buy as the average school, so that's really good. But if we look over to the right at this group's revenue performance, that picture changes. They only buy about $500 per school, compared to that average public school revenue per building of about $5,400. The most urban schools at the top were far less likely to buy, but they spend a lot more per building, almost 2.5 times the average. And there is plenty of room for growth in those urban and suburban categories. So those schools have been harder to convert, but when they do, the payoff is quite big. So they're fairly lucrative. Next slide, please. I also wanted to show you that we do run reports, similar reports for district customers. As you all know, some of your sales come in from district offices directly, some come from schools directly. So we create profile reports for both types of customers. And this sample report looks at district enrollment for sales that originate at the district office. And we also do create reports that roll school sales up to their district level. So you can see characteristics of all the districts that are represented in your customer base, whether they buy at the school or district level. We could move to the next slide, please. I showed you here enrollment and metro status, but we also profile on a number of other data variables, such as Title I, instructional expenditure, technology status, state, and others. Through the EProfile, we can usually identify a few variables that show performance trends among your customer base. And knowing that, we can usually identify sets of prospects that resemble schools and districts that already buy. Generally, if a prospect shares multiple attributes with your customers, we call that a higher level or a higher priority prospect. If it shares just one attribute with your customers, it might be a second level or second tier prospect. And schools and districts that don't share any of the attributes with your customers would be, say, a lower level, lower priority prospect. Next slide, please. And that is a very basic segmentation strategy that would separate prospects into priority levels. But what happens if there are districts that you want to identify as key prospects, but they don't resemble your customers? Liz had mentioned earlier they had wanted to pursue large districts, as many of us do, because they've got larger budgets and more students. They're definitely a growth opportunity. But in Liz's case, they found they were more successful in smaller and mid-sized districts. To do better in the large districts, they needed to tailor their message maybe more specifically, maybe find multiple champions for their products, so they could still pursue the opportunity in those large districts, but might need to treat them differently than those that we found are already performing well. Or in the example that we just looked at, we saw a high rate of conversion in rural schools, but very low revenue per building. Since those schools convert at a very high rate, if the revenue per building could be increased, that might be potentially lucrative. So maybe there would be opportunities to offer product packages or cross-selling opportunities that could raise revenue per school. Maybe they might want to focus on those rural schools that are larger, maybe the regional high schools, for example, that draw in students from a larger area and have a high population. If they could be converted, they could potentially pull a much larger sale. So finally, I would want to close out with how you can apply your segmentation strategy to your plans, both for individual promotions and overall campaigns. Just for example, if you had a budget to run an email promotion of, say, 50,000 records, we could segment your list, including the highest priority prospects first, then second tier, and if there would be room left, add in some lower priority prospects. Your account team will understand which schools and districts are in each of your priority levels because they'll have worked through the profile with you. We're looking at a broader overall marketing and sales strategy. You might include highest priority prospects in your lead nurturing program, and maybe mail them your annual catalog and include them in your social media strategy and in your direct sales team's account list. Whereas a second-tier school might get, say, 3 or 4 of those strategies, but maybe not be on your direct sales team's account list until their lead was warmed up. And then that lowest priority group might only get maybe the lead nurturing, but not be in some of the other programs. And as prospects are warmed up and opportunities identified, they might move up on that priority list. With that, I'm going to hand off to Liz to talk a little bit about putting all of this into practice.
Thank you, Terry, and thank you so much for those insights. And you made some really good points about, it's not just doing more of what you do well, right? It's also really thinking differently about where you're not having success. And, sometimes I do think it probably does make sense to say, nope, we're not going after this group. But sometimes, yeah, you have to just shift what you're saying, who you're reaching, and how you're positioning everything. So that was really good insight. Thank you, Terry. One of the other things about education is, the sales cycle is very predictable with some exceptions, but overall and in general, the school year is, very much the same across the country. And the way that new programs get implemented is pretty much the same across the country as well. And it makes sense. So things like a new program is obviously going to be implemented at the start of a school year, and teachers will need to be trained the preceding summer. We know these things to be true. So one of the things that you can do once you understand who you need to be going after, why it is that school district role is a good fit for your product and they purchase more frequently from you, is to lay over where are they at in the buying cycle at different points during the year. So we have a handout that you'll be getting that goes into a little bit more detail, but I think it's important to choose the right channel and the right type of message and call to action based on where that school or district is at in the buying cycle. So there's awareness and familiarity, there's consideration and trial, and then there's the planning and implementation phase that happens. So what's going on when, and what do you need to be putting into the market? Do you know that guidance counselors are a really great decision maker in large districts in the Southeast? Great. Well, if it's September, they're just starting to research. So what can you do to help them understand who you are, introduce yourself to them, and what types of things can you put in market to get them to think about you, so that when they're moving into the consideration phase in January and then into the spring, you're on the list to be considered. And then at the consideration phase, what else do they need to know? How do you stack up against the competition, for example? So these are things that you want to lay over your messaging strategy. And, one of the key channels continues to be email. So let's take a look at some of the email best practices. And we're going to look at the channels, email, beyond email, and content, and think about how you do these things well, but also once you have the data about the type of people you're looking for, how do you make sure that that comes to life in your marketing? So with email, there's templates and there's newsletters, and Terry pointed out a couple different ways that you can apply this information to how you target people. So there's also the layer of, are they good prospects? Are they hot leads? Are they middle of the road? Should you really just nurture them because probably not going to convert? So you've got your templates and your newsletters, and you want to think about the messaging in terms of where we're at in the buying cycle, how hot those leads are based on their ideal customer profile, and then how much effort you want to put toward them. And I think that one of the things that is really important is keeping in mind the end goal isn't necessarily to have a really rockin' email where everyone opens it, everyone clicks, and everyone downloads. What you're really trying to do is uncover great targets to have productive conversations with your sales team. And so that's why the messaging and the content download pieces, all of that is really important. So in order to understand that, you need to track and measure, and you need to use that and constantly improve what you're doing. And you also want to maintain a clean database. So one of the things that, sometimes can be a little bit scary, but it can really help improve your overall marketing efforts and practices, is just take people out who don't respond. Maybe it's the wrong role, maybe they've moved on and you don't know it. But if they're not responding, don't waste your efforts. Don't reduce your email reputation by going out to people who never respond. So clean up your database. So going beyond email, the reality today is that people get, and an inbox gets over 100 email messages every single day. And most people have multiple inboxes. So your message is competing with a lot that's happening. And you've got deliverability. Is it even getting into the inbox? So sometimes it's really important, actually most of the time, it's really important to think beyond just email. So here's just some of the different ways that you can think about reaching people beyond just that email approach. You can do social. You can think about search and what content is on your website, and content in terms of the actual pages that are on your website, but also content in terms of articles, blog posts, and resources. And then even thinking beyond that, hard touch, trade shows and events. The example that we started with just now was, if you know that you do really well in the Southeast, what live conferences are happening and how can you do things that are going to resonate with the profile of your ideal customer, and how can you get them to visit your booth or attend an actual live event and uncover more people who are in the purchase process now. Social. So social is great because unlike email, you are going where people already are spending their time. And it's really interesting. And we actually did a webinar a few months ago where we dug into social a lot more. And educators are more likely, and in many instances, twice as likely to be active on social channels versus the general population. So social is a really important channel. And you can use email to reinforce your messages and connect with the right people. But social is a place to put your message. It's very cost effective, and it can help you uncover that timing piece of your puzzle of who's in the market now. And we actually just are launching Agile Social. So you would be able to take advantage of some of the targeting that you might have found very useful and beneficial in the email space, and apply those same techniques to social and get your message in front of just the right people in some of the channels that are really important. And, so you've got emails and outreach, you've got socials and outreach, but what is the actual message that you're putting there? Sometimes product specific is important, but if it's an awareness type of time of year, what you want to do is think about your call to action and what you are giving them as a value. Is it a webinar? Is it, maybe you're conducting a survey and going to publish the results? Maybe it's a white paper or an infographic, and you really want to deepen the engagement and you want to facilitate lead generation. And so in some of the earlier steps of the buying process, this content piece is really critical. And now you're going to be able to apply your ideal customer learnings to this content. You can have best practices and case studies of these ideal customers, and you can actually actively pursue them and request that they let you do a profile on them, because people, especially in education, they like to hear from peers and understand more of how you are directly impacting student learning, helping them reach their goals. When you put those things on your website, it's going to help with organic search. And knowing your ideal customers, for example, are in smaller schools, maybe with high college attendance, maybe parent communication is really critical, and SAT and ACT prep is top of mind. Well, how can you take that information and make it come alive in a webinar series, in blog posts? What types of industry experts can you ask to come and speak and sponsor some just, thought leadership types of events and assets. So there's lots of different things that you can do once you really understand who it is you're going after. And it will help you to make everything more effective and to build your engagement with these people as you are keeping the end in mind with making sure that you're getting the right people in front of your salespeople so that you are able to actually do more in the marketplace and get more people to take advantage of the great products and services that you offer. So Alyssa, that is everything that I wanted to share today. Terry, if you have anything, please don't hesitate to jump in. But I'm wondering, if there were any questions that came in or if there's any final thoughts or input from either of you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Liz and Terry. I think that the success story, the demo of the EProfile tool, and then the subsequent slides tell a compelling story. There are several questions, so I will share them with you now to field. The first one is, how do you develop marketing for Title I districts and schools?
Yeah, so Title I, schools that are high Title I definitely are a key target for a lot of companies selling into schools and districts, because those funds have very specific ways that they can be spent. So the other thing that I think is important too is that sometimes you might have to think about your product in terms of how it fits into the different funding buckets and educate a potential customer about how they can spend Title I funds to pay for example, the curriculum piece of it, but they might need to use a different funding bucket for the actual training of the use of that curriculum. And so making sure that you're being a really good partner is important. And high Title I schools, the other thing that I think is really important is understanding the timing of those funds and when they're being released and when they can be spent. And so being, that value added business partner to the school and making sure that they understand that you know how this works and that you are going to work with them so that they can get the most for their money and for their students, that's one of the most critical things. And one of the things too is you can see in your own customer profile, is high Title I a good fit, or maybe it's low Title I. So I think that it's also important to understand that. You might not understand who actually is a good fit for your product. And if it's low Title I, that's when competitive grants are going to come into play there. And also understanding just the traditional basic funding and how those different buckets can be used against your product, and how things need to be invoiced can be a really important piece of that conversation as well. Terry, I don't know if you have anything additional to add around getting to Title I schools, and the one thing that I think is really important is just understanding that sometimes high Title I is not a good fit, which might not be something that's being considered by sales or even marketing or product, the product marketing group.
Thanks, Liz. That is a really good point. Many schools get at least some Title I dollars, but not all schools get a lot of Title I dollars. And we can help you distinguish between schools that can spend their Title I dollars across their student body, schools that get a lot of Title I dollars, but maybe not enough students in their school to spread it over the entire school, and some that just get a little bit of Title I. So we can really help you segment that Title I market as well, so that you can change your messaging based on what type of Title I school you're looking at.
Yeah, thank you. That's important too. Yeah.
Terrific.
Are there other questions?
Yes, we do have some other questions. The next question is about the education sales cycle. The question is, it seems tailored for core curriculum. Are there any campaign flows and/or timings that are best for supplemental?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So there's a couple things that happen throughout the school year that are, sometimes it's really unique to that particular state or that particular school or district. Smaller schools definitely have more authority over the spending versus large districts that things are very much driven from the top down. And so that's one of the first things I think that you would want to look at is just, if you're going to want to sell, outside of this because you have a supplemental product or you have something that's very classroom driven, or perhaps it's more of a consumable. So there might be a replenishment effort that needs to be happening there. Looking at some of the smaller schools and districts and focusing there is where you are going to find that you can reach decision makers more easily. And with supplemental 2, one of the things that happens after the school year is, of course, your anticipated enrollment might shift. And so that's something that, maybe September, October, trying to look at any schools or districts that perhaps had more students than the previous year. So they have a growing enrollment, which means that they're going to need more books, more desks, more licenses, more pins, more everything. And that can really help you focus some of your efforts to get some of those, in-year dollars. There's also certain buckets of funding, and I'm thinking that, doing a funding tutorial might be really good, because with the introduction of ESSA, there have actually been a lot of changes recently as to how dollars are allocated and how they need to be spent. But there are definitely a couple different points throughout the school year where certain types of funds need to be spent. And so that's where, if you understand the types of funding that can pay for what you offer, you are going to be a really great partner to these the schools. And throughout the year, it's really getting more into the classroom level. So if you've got a product that really is district implementation and it's used by every single student, probably not a lot of opportunity unless you have, with the exception of perhaps adding more licenses after the start of the school year. But if you've got a product that is, something that is a classroom budget, under $500, and the teacher can use it, they definitely have their own budgets, that's when you're going to want to wait until the school year started, give them some breathing room, and then September, October, go in and, with your message, make it super simple for them to purchase from you, having, sometimes some really basic stuff like just a downloadable purchase order so that they can just check it off, fill it out, take it to the purchase department. Some schools still do buy like that. So understanding that piece of it as well can help you be successful. But replenishment, even after the start of the second semester, sometimes, maybe they had a program change, or maybe they're not seeing the success that they wanted to. And so you can look at, how did a school do with adequate yearly progress? We've got some school performance data that's available, and so you can look at schools that might be struggling and target them if you've got some supplemental tools for reading or math or whatever that school is going for. And they will find the money, especially if they can purchase it more at the classroom or single school level. So that's really how I would look at anything that's supplemental, or some of the smaller ticket items. But you're right. Yeah, so that is a really good question, because a lot of spending does happen outside of that cycle as well.
Okay, thank you.
I would add that for supplemental materials, you're very well positioned to take advantage of those end of year use it or lose it dollars. So if you can squeeze in an additional promotion in April or May, you might be able to take advantage of any leftover dollars that haven't been spent that need to be spent before the school year ends.
Such a great point. Okay, you guys, we have 2 more questions and a few more minutes left. So the next question is, if you use the EProfile tool and services, do you then have a way of helping to bridge the prospective opportunity with market insights about messaging?
Yeah, so there's definitely research that can happen, and we can facilitate and with our clients and get everyone to the right people, be them internal resources or some of the partners that we work with, to help you refine your messaging strategies and your outreach strategies. Testing is really key, And when you're looking at direct marketing, and what we really focus on is the social piece and the email piece, that is where you can do some really powerful A/B split testing. And we can look at your subject lines, we can look at, really getting super tactical, but your subheads and your overall messaging, and even, should you be adding imagery or not? A lot of times an image will get caught in a spam filter at a school level, and that might be holding you back from some performance that you could experience, some high performance that you could experience. So I think that that's really important. And the same thing with social, what channel is right for you, what message is right for you. And we can certainly, again, with partners, or if it's a very basic thing, we can support you in working out, just doing some research and asking some questions about, what are schools struggling with. We do have two types of data enhancement offerings that can also help you understand what are the issues that are being experienced in your ideal customer profiles. So sometimes with just some basic district demographic data, two schools can look very similar. And when you start digging into what we call right now our intelligence data or our school performance data, you'll find that two schools that might have the same enrollment, they might be just a few miles apart. They have, the same spend on, student spending, they have the same teacher ratio. They can be very, very different. And we did a webinar not too long ago where we really dug into this, but there's two schools that are barely 4 miles apart, look very similar on the surface, but when you start to dig into them and you look at some of these other data sources that we have, you start to find that one school, high achieving, and their priorities are things like college prep, making sure that kids are, have access to accelerated courses, and making sure that they understand and are meeting all of the basic requirements for a university. Whereas the other school that's barely 4 miles away is, they're struggling, they're high Title I, they are really just looking to get kids to meet the basic requirements and graduate. And so when you look at that, you can start to understand where you want to, how you want to talk to these people and how you want to talk about your product. Maybe it is a good fit for a high achieving student body, and maybe it's not. So there's going to be some schools that you just won't go after, or maybe there is a way to use it there. And so those are the kinds of things that we can really help to inform some of the specifics around messaging and continue to build out your data profile so that you're making really smart decisions about who you're targeting and what you're saying to them. So okay. It's the testing, and it's overlaying some of these other data offerings and doing just some basic research. And yes, we can, if we can't do it, we definitely have partners that can help you achieve that success.
So Liz, you touched on a couple of things that are a good segue to the final question. After using the EProfile tool, how can Agile help us to build, deploy, and optimize campaigns?
Yeah, so Terry, you can chime in too. So Terry does this for a lot of our clients. A couple of the things, one of the first things is just making sure that your emails get deployed. And so a lot of the work that we do is not terribly fancy, but it's really the basics of email good practices and best practices, and database good practices and best practices. And some of the stuff, is just one of the first things I want to make sure people think about is getting your data clean and then putting in place data hygiene rules and protocols so that it stays clean. And that will help you so much in just getting your emails to the intended party. But the emails itself, testing is always helpful because it helps you to understand what you could be doing better and making really good choices around all the different elements of an email. And also we have eNalysis. So that is our our deployment reporting tool, which gives you really detailed information into how an email performs and where it performed well, so that you can know what you should keep doing because it's working and where you need to refine things. So if it's an important target for you and an email isn't performing well, it's probably the message itself isn't engaging or the call to action isn't clear, and we can really help you and give you a lot of information that can further refine what you're doing and what you're putting into the marketplace.
Yeah, and I think I'd just add to that. I mentioned during the web, we could help you build your lists based on the segmentation strategy that emerges from the eProfile. So as we learn which characteristics you deem high priority and which are lower priority, we can use that to build your list that you would then use for your email campaigns, for your direct mail if you're doing that, and for the list that you would set up for your sales team to call on. Mm-hmm. So that's certainly something we can put into place almost immediately after your profile is done.
Great.
So that concludes the Q&A session. Liz and Terry, if there's anything else you want to add before we close.
No,
just thank you very much for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.